Welcome to the first session of our Community Change webinar series with Tamarack's own Paul Bourne and Liz Weaver. In today's webinar, Paul and Liz will discuss the emerging ideas and strategies that are disrupting how communities are responding to the complex issues they face. Communities are fluid and dynamic places. Increasingly, we recognize that the old ways of working are not achieving the impacts desired. We are seeing negative trends in many communities on issues like poverty, homelessness, obesity, and teen suicide. How do we disrupt these patterns? What is the leadership needed to truly transform our communities and drive change forward? These 5 ideas, collective impact, collaborative leadership, community development, community innovation, and evaluating community change, are pivotal to moving community change forward and the core elements of the Community Change Institute taking place September 26th to 30th, 2016. Paul and Liz will frame these 5 ideas today and discuss how they are essential in disrupting communities to impact community change. I'd like to welcome our speakers, Paul Bourne and Liz Weaver, to the session today. Paul is the co-founder and president of Tamarack Institute, a leader on issues of place, citizen engagement, collective impact, and community innovation. Paul is the author of 4 books, including 2 Canadian bestsellers, and is internationally recognized for his community-building activities that have won awards from the United Nations and as a fellow Ashoka, the world's largest network of social innovators. Paul grew up in the Fraser Valley of British Columbia as the son of Mennonite refugees. This, in part, is what made him deeply curious about and engaged in ideas that cause people to work together for the common good, work that he describes as collective altruism. Liz is the vice president of Tamarack and leads the Tamarack Learning Centre. Previously, she led the Vibrant Communities Canada team, where she provided coaching, leadership, and support to a network of community partners across Canada. Liz is one of Tamarack's most in-demand trainers. She has developed and delivered curricula on a variety of workshop topics, including collaborative governance, leadership, collective impact, community innovation, influencing policy change, and social media for impact and engagement. Prior to joining Tamarack, Liz was the director for the Hamilton Roundtable on Poverty Reduction, which was recognized with the Canadian Urban Institute's David Crombie Leadership Award in 2009. In her career, Liz has also held leadership positions with the YWCA Hamilton, Volunteer Hamilton, and Volunteer Canada. In 2002, Liz completed a Master's of Management through McGill University, and her thesis, Storytelling and the Voluntary Sector, was published. Liz was awarded the Queen's Jubilee Medal in 2002 for her leadership in the voluntary sector, and in 2004 was awarded the Women in the Workplace Award from the City of Hamilton. We're delighted to welcome you both and appreciate you taking the time to share your insights and experiences with us today. I'll now turn things over to Paul and Liz.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be on this call with you, and thanks, Stephanie, for that great introduction. How are you doing, Liz?
I'm fine, Paul. I always, when I hear my bio being read, I feel a little bit old. So, yeah, but I'm doing well. Thank you.
Well, just so that you know, I work with you every day, and you've got more energy than someone right out of high school. So it's lovely to be your colleague.
Thanks.
Liz, you know, we wanted to talk today about a number of things, and they're going to lead us to understanding why Tamarack is moving toward deep thinking around community change. And we've spent a lot of years working in communities, and we've worked at a very practical level. So, you know, even though we've identified these core issues that we feel we need to work on, you know, such as collective impact, community engagement, community innovation, the need for a new kind of leadership that we're calling collaborative leadership, and a deep understanding of what's working. And so being able to actually understand and evaluate community impact. And so we've been working at those issues specifically and as an approach, but we've practically implemented them through things like vibrant communities and deepening communities. in trying to understand how do we achieve better impact in our communities. And I have a lot of thoughts about that, why it's necessary and what we need to think through. But why don't we start with you, Liz? What's happening in communities now, and why is it so important that we start to think more strategically and maybe even differently about the work that we're doing?
Yeah, you know, Paul, I think that we are living in different times, right? You just need to open your newspaper or watch the news, and you know, it is both a frightening and sometimes challenging world that we live in. We're so hyper-connected, you know, through things like the internet on the one hand, and yet we're so disconnected in many ways with our neighbors and in our communities. And so, you know, I think there are these trends that seem to be abutting against each other, right? The hyper-connection, the 24/7 news feed, and yet this disconnection that we're seeing in communities and amongst the citizens that we have in our communities. There's also the trend that, you know, we've had for a long time where we have lots of organizations that are delivering really good programs and services on the ground, but what we're not seeing is real traction on these larger scale issues that Stephanie talked about in the introduction around things like homelessness and poverty. And where we do begin to see some of that, I think the pattern that both you and I are noticing is that there's something different happening in those communities that are trying to tackle the larger scale issues. And so, you know, is it individual organizations and programs, or is it this more collective approach? And how do we truly move the needle on these kinds of issues that are really challenging our communities? And I think, you know, for me, the third kind of big thing that I've been noticing in my work at Tamarack and in the work of community is that, you know, it really does call for a different kind of leadership. And so all of us that are engaged in community change, we have a certain amount of skills in our toolbox, you know, how do we work together, those kinds of things, but it actually is calling for us not only to be looking at the on-the-ground work, but also looking at how our on-the-ground work is impacting the system as a whole. And so these kind of things that seem to be almost working at, not in parallel, but at almost loggerheads with each other, we've got to kind of figure out, okay, so how do we work differently? How do we disrupt, you know, the status quo? How do we really look at communities in a unique way? And so those are three things that I've been thinking about in terms of the challenging times that we're living in. What about you, Paul?
Well, Liz, those are really important thoughts, and I particularly, you know, am thinking about the good things that are happening, and particularly in Canada. And I've been thinking a lot about how Canada has responded to the Syrian refugees. And I've been thinking a lot about private sponsorship. And I think one of the proudest moments that I've had in maybe a decade is when citizens who have come together, and I'm involved in 4 different groups, including 2 neighborhoods, that have come together to sponsor a refugee, and they raise 30, and you know, we've just been asking another group that I'm part of to raise $50,000 to bring Syrian refugees over, and it requires a large-scale engagement. And then when the government doesn't act fast enough, I get so excited because the agencies and these community people rise up and say, hey, we want to do something. You have to work faster, government, so that we get our refugees, so that we can do our work. We've got everything set up here. And that's just, I'm just thrilled by that. I'm thrilled by Canadians' response. I have a number of stories that I want to share today about that, but I'm also really worried today about what's been happening around issues of race in the United States. And that's not just in the United States. You know, we've been working at it here in Canada as well. but we've had tremendous struggles, but a new awareness even about Aboriginal issues and wanting to bring some sense of equity there and justice, you know. And I think it's a really important time. Now, what I've experienced is that communities are more important than ever. I say that in a Canadian context, but I also say that in an American context. And I've also spent a fair bit of time in Australia and in New Zealand and have worked with many colleagues around the world. And there's something about place. I mean, just to give you a perspective, we used to think that a lot of the human services in Canada were a federal responsibility. And it was in a sense that it's all the peoples of Canada, and that we wanted to create kind of an equity across the country. And so we embedded many of our human services programs at a national level. And then, you know, over time, we devolved that to the provinces. And, you know, as in the United States, there's a lot of state now initiatives. But what we've seen recently, and I'm talking about the last 5 years, is where cities have been taking on quality of life issues. And they've been looking at problems in their communities, and they've been saying, we are the primary leaders that need to bring about this change. And I find that to be fascinating. And I think about the issue of poverty, and I think of mayors of Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, that in their first mandates, they wanted to tackle this big issue. They wanted to address poverty. When you think about that, municipalities have so often just basically dealt with infrastructure, you know, water, sewer, roads, policing, ambulance, and fire, you know, that kind of thing. But now they're moving their focus onto bigger issues, and they're saying we can affect change in place. Now that's been very interesting, and you could say, okay, well maybe we just have all these progressive mayors. I don't know if that's exactly what it is. Citizens have different expectations and are very, I would say, almost like the word jealous of their community. They're proud of their community, and they want change. And they're pushing government to do more. And local government, which is often the closest government to citizens, has had to respond. Now, what's further complicating things is that citizens are also somewhat cynical about leadership generally. And so they're not ready to just let government do it. They want their voice to matter. They believe that they have skills that they can bring toward this. And we have a very sophisticated voluntary or not-for-profit, or what we call non-governmental organizations that are working very hard at bringing about change. So I think to myself, wow, you know, it's, you know, I mean, obviously this is almost trite when you can say it's the best of times and the worst of times. And I never know what the worst of times means. You know, are these uprisings because things are getting worse? Or are these uprisings because actually people feel empowered to do something, that they want to bring about change and feel they have the skills to do that? And I think it's really interesting. And when I go into communities, what I find is we have some of the best people that I've ever experienced in my 30 years in this work, working on these issues. Some of the most trained people, the most knowledgeable people, the most committed people, both in government and non-government organizations. So I have to be very hopeful. And then I think to myself, well, okay, everyone's saying these issues are getting more complex. I I don't know. I mean, maybe they are. Maybe the world is getting more complicated. Or is it just that we have changed the way we think? And I think about academia as a great example. Very seldom do we have pure science, you know, where people are just interested in chemistry or just interested in biology, right? It's often that we have these type of comprehensive thinking that's going on in academia where people are cross-discipline and they're starting to bring multiple angles of thinking into their expertise. And they're thinking more whole systems approaches. Now, maybe just because we think in whole systems, that issues become more complex, but it's actually a good thing. It's not that complex issues mean that the problems are deeper or they're more entrenched. It could just mean that our understanding of the issues have changed. Now, that's good news, I think, for communities. Primarily because if our understanding of issues have changed and our understanding of complexity has changed, our understanding of community issues have changed, and therefore we start to think about them as complex issues, it means that we want better responses. Now, as a Canadian, I look at our own country and I say things are actually going quite well. And on most measures of health and poverty and issues like that, the vast majority of people have a good quality of life. Almost 80 to 85%, some communities up to 90% are not poor. So why is it that we're demanding more? It's complex for me. Why are we demanding more? Why do we want it to be that 95% are not poor? Why do we want more action on the environment? Why do we want more action in terms of quality of life? And so I can only think that we're not content with the status quo. And I wonder if things are actually getting worse, or are we at a stage as a society, maybe as a world, that we're going to have dramatic leaps in making things better. And though we've identified pockets of where things are really broken, there are incredible moments of optimism, and I believe it is in communities where that optimism is particularly warranted. And that leads us into these 5 issues: collective impact, community engagement, collaborative leadership, community innovation, and evaluating community impact. And we have spent an enormous amount of time at Tamarack thinking about those 5 issues and saying it's more than collective impact, because it's collective impact with community engagement. It's collective impact that leads to community innovation. It's collective impact and a new way of leading, a collaborative way of leading. And we're thinking all of this through, and it's beautiful. That's all I want to say. And I know I'm this eternal optimist, but I'm really excited about these times and think that there's so much hope here. But Liz, go ahead.
I find it interesting, right? Because I do think, I think that there is both optimism and challenge in the work that and then the change that we're seeing in communities, right? And I kind of agree with you, Paul, that as we sometimes are more connected in community or more connected to each other, that we do actually start to uncover the complexity of the problem, for sure. I do think, though, that, the question that I would have, maybe the consternation that I would raise is, are we all the professionals that are at the table, right? And then how do we how do we truly engage that broader community voice? And I know that that's some of the stuff that we're going to talk about when we dive a little bit deeper into these topic areas. But I think I would agree with you. Yes, you know, that it could be that we are entering into more hopeful times, but I still think that there is some things that we could be doing as individuals and as organizations to move us in different kinds of ways, in more equitable kinds of ways.
Oh, no doubt, Liz. There is so much room for improvement, and what we're seeing is unprecedented innovation around that. Liz, let's talk though about these 5 areas, and maybe we could start by just asking the audience at any point, if you want to ask questions, you know, in your there's a way of doing that. So are we going to go to an open mic, or are we going to ask people to do that right on the computer program?
I think what we're going to do is we're going to just have them put in their questions. They'll type in their questions, and we'll invite Stephanie or Stephanie to, you know, pipe in the questions as we go. Stephanie, if you could jump ahead to the slide with the 5 idea areas on it, that would be great, just as a reminder to us. So do you want me to start off around, you know?
I would, Liz, but I also want to think about, okay, so, you know, we've now made this unprecedented change at Tamarack, where we've said for the last 2 years we've been running collective impact summits. And now we're going to be in September, and this is the introductory webinar, but in September we're going to be hosting community leaders from around the world. Last year we had 11 countries represented. And we're going to shift from just purely collective impact to these 5 issue areas. Collective impact is still extremely important in terms of the thinking. We think it is an important addition to the thinking around community change, maybe the most important addition that has been made available. And there is a huge amount of material that will be covered. There's lots of workshops on collective impact. But we've decided to go broader than that. And we've begun to say that we want to look at a suite of ideas that are all integrated and that we think are all important to understand in order for us to move the needle. Maybe we're calling this Collective Impact 3.0. I'm not 100% sure how we describe that. Liz, can you just sort of bridge that for us, kind of the collective impact and the Community Change Institute that we're running, and then maybe take us through the emerging thinking around collective impact and how we're going to talk about it at the Community Change Institute?
Yeah, I think you set it up really well, Paul. I think, you know, as we're talking at Tamarack in terms of, you know, what people are paying attention to and how communities are working and changing together, we see the big circle as being community change. And we know that there are a number of strategies in that big circle of community change that all of you who are listening into this call are engaged in, of which collective impact is one of those strategies, and is an important one right now, one that has a lot of attention to it. But that community change is much more, it's much more malleable. There's many strategies in terms of really trying to impact communities in a positive kind of way and really get communities engaged in their work, looking at the kind of theme of who are the leaders and which leaders need to be at the table. How do we build collaborative leadership across our whole community? What are some of those innovative practices that are out there, you know, in other domains that could be brought into the work of community change that, you know, we're not necessarily as focused on? And so all of these 5 areas at Tamarack, we've really seen them as being quite pivotal to our thinking and to the thinking that we're observing in the work that you all are doing in your communities. And so I think that you're absolutely right, Paul. That's why we decided to have the Community Change Institute really look at 5 areas or 5 learning themes, and really to explore them not only as separate themes, but also how they're integrated together. What are the things that we need to put into our toolbox to have an impact on communities, and then how will we know that we're having that impact? That's where evaluation kind of comes into the rubric. I'm going to start off a little bit by talking about collective impact, because it seems to me that's been, a significant focus of my work over the last couple of years. We're going to talk about collective impact for sure, and the 3 preconditions and the 5 conditions of collective impact. For those of you that don't know anything about collective impact, it's a framework for community change that says, in order to get communities to tackle a big issue, whether it's poverty, whether it's homelessness, a big complex issue, you can utilize the 5 conditions: common agenda, shared measurement, mutually reinforcing activities, continuous communication, and backbone infrastructure. If you put these 5 conditions into play in your community with the right players around the table, you'll be able to both identify the problem that you're trying to solve, and then really make some significant traction on this problem. And there's, since the first articles on collective impact appeared in the winter of 2011, so it's been around for about 5 years now, there's been lots of evolution in this practice. So we're going to talk about that, but some of the things that we've been thinking about at Tamarack in terms of collective impact is, what does 3.0 look like? So, what are the things that we need to be considering to really make collective impact as a framework thing? And so some of the things that we've been considering are, yes, a common agenda. That's a really great condition of collective impact, but how do we make it owned by the whole community? How do we turn a common agenda into an aspiration so that everyone in the community says, yes, this is something that we can all aspire to, whether it's, getting kids to graduate from high school or truly trying to move the needle on poverty. So what does it take to have that common agenda be an agenda that is shared by everyone? And where we've seen it be really pivotal and really successful is when communities have really thought about it from an aspirational perspective, and they've really looked upon collective impact from an engaging lens. The other things that we thought about is, shared measurement, yes, for sure, but what are the things that we need to consider around learning and sense-making? This is something that we've spent a lot of time at Tamarack with our vibrant community partners, really diving deep and moving the needle on poverty. We're trying to always make sense of what are the strategies that are most pivotal, that are getting us to larger scale impact and that are really moving the needle. And you get that through shared measurement, right? You get to see, those strategies that have larger impact. And we see mutually reinforcing activities and shared measurement as actually hanging together in terms of a cohesive kind of approach around conditions. In terms of continuous communications, I think that's where we've seen at Tamarack this whole notion of engagement. How do we, again, it's tied to aspiration, but how do we get that shared ownership, that community ownership of both the problem but also the opportunity that the solution presents, right? And how do we as communities grow and thrive and really move forward in these kinds of ways? And then backbone infrastructure, it's something that I've recently been particularly interested in. And so, backbone infrastructure is more successful when all the people in engaged in the collective impact effort have some way of investing in the future, investing in the backbone, investing in, you know, the community change effort. And so how do we pragmatically get that to happen? So those are, you know, what are the different backbone structures, and what are some governance strategies that are engaged with all of that? So in the learning theme of collective impact, I think what we're going to try to do is really push at the boundaries around collective impact. Some of the recently released principles of practice that FSG and the partners have released around collective impact, they're important. They're part of the how, but we want to push it even further. So what about the engagement? Paul?
I want to get, oh, sorry, Liz.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Absolutely community engagement, but I'm so excited about what you're talking about, and I just want to let everyone know that Liz and Mark Cabage are going to be right now writing a paper called Collective Impact 3.0, and we'll actually be releasing it before the Community Change Institute. But it's an exciting time for us in the thinking around collective impact and taking it to the next level. And all of the workshops are going to focus on that. And Stephen Patrick's going to be coming from Aspen, and we're going to be focusing on taking the thinking of collective impact outside the box. Yes, we'll still be providing the basics and the understanding, but there's a whole new innovative thinking that's going on. And so thanks so much, Liz, for doing that work with Mark. Let me talk a little bit about how we're going to be bringing community engagement into this. So, you know, we know that in collective impact that a common agenda is much more than a community plan. That it's actually an agreement around multiple stakeholders from various sectors coming into a common understanding of the future and adopting that common understanding as their motivating and driving force, and that they're willing to work together far beyond collaboration to have a collective impact. Well, in that community engagement work, we've been doing a lot of thinking in the last 2 years, and we've been running a 3-day event called Community Engagement, the Next Generation. And we've been looking more specifically at tools, but we're also trying to say, okay, how do we understand community engagement? And there is a wonderful a kind of a collective community engagement continuum that we use a lot. And the first 3 cycles of that continuum are inform, consult, and involve. And I always call those the 3 most important understandings of community engagement. And so often we've been able to talk about them individually. We give good information to people, and they're able to make better decisions, right? We consult people so that we're able to get their input in order for us to make better decisions. And then we find ways to involve people to have them implement a solution, essentially. But in the kind of community engagement that we're talking about, we can't separate those 3 anymore. We need to enter into every community engagement process informing, consulting, and involving. It's one thought. And that when people have good information, they've been able to give their opinion and their ideas and suggestions, and they feel engaged, we need to be able to provide an opportunity for them to be involved. And so it's not one of the 3, it's all 3. And I want to talk more about that, but we don't have time today. The absolute importance of those 3 opportunities. And then where community engagement goes from there are principles of organizing large groups of people. So on its basic level, we want now, when people are engaged, to be able to collaborate together and to take their issue together in a whole new way. But then we don't want it just for the sake of collaboration. I think many of us are tired of collaborating. We want to see change. So we don't want to just collaborate. We want a collective impact. And so that whole cycle of community engagement is extremely important to us. But then, in addition, we feel that there are so many new tools and new ways of thinking and approaches and just the use of technology that allows us to do this in exciting and important new ways. So let's keep going down this cycle. What about looking at the issue of collaborative leadership?
Yeah, so for me, collaborative leadership is, I think, a really important thing to consider as one of these big ideas, right? And so at Tamarack, we've looked a lot at collaborative leadership from the lens of Ron Heifetz's around, you know, how are we adaptive, right? How do we not only be a leader, but as communities begin to shift and change, that we're also adapting with these shifts and changes. And what does that mean as a collaborative leader in community? Because sometimes we lead from the front. That's kind of how we traditionally think about leadership, but in adaptive leadership, we sometimes have to lead from behind, right? And so what does that mean when we have still these roles that we play as positional leaders within organizations around a collaborative table? There are times where our positional leadership comes to the forefront, and then there are times where other folks and other positional leaders need to come to the forefront. So, you know, it's kind of playing around with the concepts of adaptive leadership, of, you know, collaborative leadership from a positional shared leadership perspective. And then I think, you know, we also at Tamarack have followed for a long time the work of John Ott, and, you know, the what he refers to as the scallop principle. And for those of you that know anything about scallops, they have lots of little eyes, and the eyes are really in place to protect the scallop from the predator. And John Ott would say, you know, for us to really be able to move the needle on community change, we need to make sure that the right eyes are on the problem, the issue, the opportunity that is in front of us, right? So how do we make sure that those eyes are engaged? And that's also, I think, a big challenge of collaborative leadership, is to, you know, not talk to the usual people around the table, but then really ask ourselves whose eyes need to be on this problem, this issue, this opportunity, and how do we engage them? So I think collaborative leadership and community engagement, Paul, are linked together, but for me, collaborative leadership is both how do we reach out and engage leaders in this work in a meaningful, collaborative way, but then also looking at ourselves and saying, okay, to what degree do I lead from the front? To what degree can I lead from behind? And what does this mean to my own kind of connection to collaborative leadership? What are some of your thoughts in this area?
Oh, I've got a lot, Liz, and I want to actually keep going on all this, but I'm also realizing that we're already starting to get questions here, and I'd love if people could give us more. But we have one here from Andriana. Is it Andriane or Andriana? Who talks about 80 to 85% doing great is super. It's a comment that I had made. But on the other hand, some communities do not have those great numbers, and it's necessary to work with these small communities to do much better, because bad numbers affect many people. And I don't have an answer to that, of course, because it's not really a question. It's just a super comment. I agree completely with you, Andriana, around this, because, you know, even when you think about 10% or 15% in a place like Toronto, or even a smaller community like Waterloo, you know, where there's 500,000 people, that's still 50,000 to 75,000 people. And then we have all the people that are maybe doing well statistically, but are still very vulnerable. So we want to think about that in a very real way and don't want to be overly optimistic. But we also have to recognize that when the vast majority of people are doing well, that we're doing a lot of things well, and that there's some really talented people out there doing that work, and that there are citizens who are deeply engaged. And I think all of that together brings us to a different way of approaching it than saying things are broken and they need to be fixed. My sense is we need to get better, not fix that which is broken now. That being said, there are some things that are absolutely broken, and I'd really like to hear from others about what you think those are and what our community's doing to fix them. Anyway, if there are more questions coming in, I don't know, Stephanie, if you have any more there, but please start to send them our way so that we can talk about them as well with you.
Yep, definitely, Paul. That is the only comment as of now, but as I mentioned to everyone earlier, this really is your chance to pick Paul and Liz's brain, so feel free to keep sending them in as they come up.
Wonderful, and I'll keep looking for them here as well. Liz, your thinking around collaborative leadership is really important, and I've taught collaborative leadership for some time, and I have to say that I don't know. It depends. And I've seen collaborative leadership that's very directive, and it works. I've seen collaborative leadership that is completely open-ended, and all the core values are there, and yet nothing happens. I've seen collaborative leadership as a way of thinking about leadership. So we actually observe not the leader, but the leadership that is taking place. So we start to look at how a community is leading, and we say, okay, how is a community working well together? And we can talk about collaborative leadership that way. I'm very curious about this one, and you're going to find at the Community Change Institute that we're going to be engaging in a lot of questions. And though we're going to be, working with tools like the Reflective Best Self, from a collaborative leadership perspective, where you're able to actually take stock of your own collaborative leadership experience and skills that you bring, and then try to understand how you want to strengthen them. It so depends on the community itself, and how people are working together. I love frameworks like Collective Impact because they give us actually a model by which to practice our leadership. And then we can engage and interact in a way to say, if I practice collaborative leadership this way, does it allow me to be both a good follower and leader in this collective impact process? When I believe that community engagement is really important, and I have the skills to engage the community, that is an important collaborative leadership skill that we bring, and it's our way of thinking about it. So much of collaborative leadership is about context. It's within the work that we're choosing to do, and it's also related to the innovation that we're hoping to see. So that's kind of an interesting take on collaborative leadership. Liz, we've got another question that has come in here.
Yep, I see that.
Oh, we've got a whole bunch that have come in now. Let's look at this one from Sarah, and maybe you can respond to this. And Sarah asks, looking at collective impact, what are some strategies to engaging and involving local businesses? Community involves two sides of the coin, business with money and residents with heart. Imagine a way of working as equal parts and the successes and movement that can be obtained. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I think, that I don't disagree with you, Sarah, in some ways, but in other ways I do disagree with you, because I think that there are business leaders that are citizens with heart, right? And I think sometimes we set ourselves up for failure when we think we have to include the whole business community when, you know, really the folks that we should be including are those citizens with heart that exist within the business community, and how do we find them, and how do we engage with them in conversation? And, you know, some of the things that we have thought about, and this links really nicely into the community engagement learning theme that we explore at Tamarack, is to really be intentional about the engagement that we have of business leaders, right? How do we know them? What are they interested in? What is their business really striving to achieve? How do they deal with their employees? What is the connection that is going to connect them to the work of community change that that we're also engaged in? And it's really being intentional about that engagement, and really being quite thoughtful about it. And I think, you know, the experience that I've had around business engagement is to, you know, to look pragmatically at what we're trying to do and where the fit is going to be, and then to do our homework on, you know, the business leaders that we would like to engage, and then really have meaningful conversations with them, recognizing that maybe not all of them will say yes, but the more you have conversations, the more you're going to get to closer and closer to yes, and in the realm of yes. And, you know, I think that we are closer than we think, but sometimes we think about them as a big amorphous blob, and they're not. They're as, you know, there's as many different types of business leaders as there are community leaders, as there are voluntary sector leaders, as there are government leaders. And so intentionality for me is the critical part of the engagement equation. Do you want me to move on to community innovation, Paul? Because I can see our time is floating away here.
I'm wondering, I know we want to get to some of those yet, but I also wanted, there's a few more questions here, Liz, and I wouldn't mind maybe doing them in the context, because actually Laura is actually asking us to talk about community innovation, and maybe I could talk about that for just a moment through her question. But I also just want to talk about the business and being involved, and business getting involved in these types of issues. Remember, Roger Martin will be at the Community Change Institute, and he's considered one of the leading business thinkers, not only in Canada, but in the world today. And he's going to be talking exactly about that issue. I also want to share, Sarah, that in March of next year, we're going to, or April of next year, in Hamilton, Ontario, we're going to be running a national event called Cities Reducing Poverty When Business is Engaged. So it'll be an amazing experience bringing business leaders together. Liz, Laura has a question here, and her question is, can you talk more about a concrete example of when positive disruption has occurred? Then she gives two great examples. Paul mentioned Canada's response to Syrian refugees. Additionally, the Housing First strategy might be another promising strategy that's moving things forward. Finally, she puts in brackets, on homelessness. Great question, Laura, and I'm thinking more about the role of community innovation in change, and I'm thinking of some of this positive disruption. How many of you know of Nicole Rycroft and her work at Canopy? And basically, Nicole is an amazing activist and change thinker and a Ashoka Fellow, and her issue has always been to protect old-growth forests, and it's bigger than that, I know. And she started out by sort of tackling the use of paper to publish books, and convinced the publisher of Harry Potter's books to not use old-growth forest paper, and now is eventually almost every major printer of books in the world has adopted that policy. So it's an interesting idea that she's just simply doing a positive disruption by getting people to stop using old-growth forest paper that has come from old-growth forests. And now she's taking on clothes. Who would have known that so many clothes are being used paper products or wood products to create clothing, and she's tackled that with amazing success. I think of Alan Mansky's work and Vicki Kamak's work at Plan, first of all, to helping people with developmental challenges and the people who love them to make sure that they're well cared for into the future. But then that led to a whole range of new thinking, which included the Registered Disability Savings Plan. And now Al and Vicki are thinking about whole new ways of talking about care. And so we've got really these kind of links between you know, working at a systems level around community innovation and then working down at the practical level. And so disruption and positive disruption can come both at a systems level. You know, we're looking at the big issue around change, and as you've described around ending homelessness in Medicine Hat, using a housing first strategy and a whole bunch of others, of course, you know, and we start to look at innovative programs and ways that people are actually implementing things at an innovative level. And I think both of those warrant an awful lot of really important idea thinking. Now, Roger Martin will also be talking a lot about social enterprise, social finance, social entrepreneurship. There will be an amazing tour of Ashoka Fellows in the Greater Toronto area that people can engage in. So there's a whole variety of new thinking that is emerging that leads to this positive disruption approach and process.
Yeah, and I think it, just to build on that for a minute, Paul, I think at Tamarack, one of the things, particularly around community innovation, is that we have the great good fortune of seeing it happen in communities across Canada and the United States. But, you know, so often the work gets centered in that community, the innovative practice gets centered in that community. And so we use our opportunities like this and like, the gathering in September to really highlight and profile community innovation and innovative practices and really try to say, okay, so what are we learning from those, and what are some things that if you're working in the realm of community change, what are some of the patterns that you might, pay attention to that might help you redesign your processes, right? And so there's a lot of stuff around design thinking and innovation labs and those kinds of things that we'll be exploring in September.
Fantastic, Liz. Hey, we've got a lot more questions that have come through. Hey, Claire, you said, is this model only for large-scale changes community-wide? Can you just clarify what you mean by in this model only? Could you type that in? Or are you just thinking just generally on the 5 areas? I know, Kendra, you have a couple of questions here. What kind of things do we need to consider when figuring out the right dosage of big picture thinking, abstract ideas, 5 learning themes, and getting down to the practicalities of the task and next steps? And I'm just hoping, Kendra, that you're going to be at the Community Change Institute, because that is exactly the type of question that we want to be engaging in. That is a brilliant question. What kind of things do we need to consider when figuring out the right dosage of big picture thinking, abstract ideas, 5 learning themes, and then getting down to the practicalities of tasks and next steps? Another great question from Denise. Could you talk a bit about power dynamics in community engagement and how did this disrupt bring equity to these? Beautiful question. Rebecca, I would like to hear your ideas on engaging the community to change. The community's response to 2 topics. First, and most relevant to my work, is the community response to domestic violence, and secondly, community's response to race and racism in the U.S. Very, very important stuff that's coming here. Rod talked about, as a non-Aboriginal person with a non-Aboriginal CBO, whose participants are primarily in inner city Aboriginal population. Are there examples and resources to learn how we can better, 1, engage, and 2, not be seen as less relevant because we are not Aboriginals? Rod, I'd personally like to talk to you about that one and my experiences that I've had in Alberta in particular. I think, Liz, on that note, I think we're getting close to wrapping up. Any just quick comments about the Community Change Institute and this whole series that we're unfolding here online? And just share a little bit about your excitement.
Yeah, I think that, the questions that have been raised today, I think they are the questions that we're grappling with at Tamarack, although I think we have seen some responses, and we hope that the speakers that we bring to the Community Change Institute and the workshops, tools, and participants will help us dive even deeper into these questions and to really think about, what is that practical dosage, right, of big ideas and then actually getting the work of community change happening in our communities. That's really what we're trying to do with this, not only this webinar series, but also with the CCI that we're hosting, that Tamarack is hosting in September. The focus on big ideas, but then the really practical getting from idea to execution. I think maybe what we could do is just move forward to the next slide really quickly, past the question slide, because Paul, you've been raising them all the way through this conversation, but maybe focus on the slide, the next conversation that we're hosting, Stephanie. The slide with Steve Patrick.
Nice.
And Jamil Alexander. So this is the first conversation in a series of webinars that we're going to be hosting leading into the collective, the Community Change Institute in September. And our next webinar is next week. And Paul, you've already talked a little bit about Steve Patrick, who's the Executive Director at the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions. But we're also going to be welcoming Jamil Alexander, who's a community organizer and a national activist. They're going to be talking about, so someone raised the question about how do we work with communities of diversity and how do we really bring the equity lens into this work. And so Steve and Jamil are going to be, exploring that in terms of the work that they're doing across the United States with opportunity youth, and both some of the challenges that they face, but also some of the lessons that they've learned working, in highly racialized communities, but also in Indigenous communities across the United States. So I'm really looking forward to that conversation as well.
Yeah, and just so people don't know, Stephen Patrick is working with Melody Barnes, who implemented Obama's White House Council on Community Change program, and they're implementing this work at a collective impact level. Steve's an amazing leader, and he'll be speaking at the Community Change Institute, and was with the Gates Foundation before. Incredible thinker, really important for us. I think there's another one following this, right, Liz? Maybe we can take it to the next slide.
I don't think we have a slide up for that yet, but we do have a slide about the Community Change Institute. But following Stephen Patrick and Jamil Alexander, we will be advertising a conversation with Severin Suzuki, who is a leading environmentalist in Canada.
David Suzuki's daughter.
Sorry?
And David Suzuki's daughter.
Yeah, and David Suzuki's daughter. And, I think part of what we're trying to do with the speakers that we've gathered together for the Community Change Institute is really bring speakers that are outside of our sector. So Roger Martin from the business community, Severin Suzuki, who's an environmentalist, Stephen Patrick with the Aspen Roundtable on Community, or the Aspen Forum for Community Change, and Francis Wesley, who is really quite involved with social innovation generation. I think these are the big ideas, and then the workshops and the tools are the practical, how to get change to happen in your community.
It's beautiful. Frances Wesley, of course, is the global thinker. She's recognized around the world for her work on social innovation, and we're so thrilled to have her. So Liz, I think we pretty much got to wrap up here. I think we're already a couple of minutes over, and thank you all so much for being on this call. Stephanie, do you have any final words that you just want to share with people and announcements?
Yeah, I just want to quickly tell people about a little bit more about the Community Change Institute. So we'd all personally like to invite you guys all to the inaugural Community Change Institute that's taking place in the city of Toronto, as Paul has mentioned previously on this call. Again, it's just a 5-day event that will feature 4 world-renowned speakers, 40 workshops, and over 250 changemakers from across the globe. So details about this incredible learning opportunity can be found on the events section of our website. And please feel free to reach out to myself, Stephanie, at Tamarack Community if you have any questions regarding this event whatsoever. And I think that's about it. So thank you everyone so much. And thank you, Paul and Liz, for your insights into today's webinar. And thank you to everyone who asked questions and made this such a great webinar. And hopefully we'll see you next week.